In 1803, when President Thomas Jefferson commissioned Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the uncharted American West, they assembled a team of roughly 30 men, hunters, soldiers, interpreters, and guides. History remembers their names, celebrates their achievements, and teaches their story in every American classroom. But there was one man whose contributions were vital, whose strength saved lives, whose diplomatic skills opened doors that would have remained closed, whose very presence changed the course of the expedition. Yet for 2 centuries, his name was barely whispered, his story deliberately obscured, his heroism erased. His name was York, and he was William Clark's enslaved man. While Lewis and Clark returned to acclaim, land grants, and positions of honor, York returned to bondage. While the expedition members received payment and recognition, York received neither freedom nor credit. This is the story history tried to forget. The story of the black explorer who helped map America, but was denied his place in its memory. As you settle in tonight, prepare to discover how one man's intelligence, courage, and humanity shaped one of America's most legendary journeys, and how a nation conspired to erase him from the very history he helped create. York was born around 1770 in Virginia, the property of the Clark family, and from childhood was enslaved to William Clark, who was only a year or 2 older. They grew up together, not as friends, for one was master and one was property, but as constant companions, in the peculiar intimacy that slavery forced upon both enslaver and enslaved. York was described as a large, powerfully built man, perhaps 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, remarkable size for that era. He was intelligent, resourceful, and skilled in ways that would prove essential to survival in the wilderness. When William Clark received his commission to co-lead the Corps of Discovery alongside Meriwether Lewis, York had no choice in the matter. He would go too, not as an expedition member with rights and compensation, but as Clark's personal servant, his legal property tasked with serving his master's needs. Yet from the expedition's very first days, York's role would exceed anything Clark intended. The question that haunts this story is simple yet profound. How could a man contribute so vitally to such a celebrated achievement, risk his life repeatedly for his companions, and still be denied the most basic recognition? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about American mythology and whose stories we choose to tell. On May 14, 1804, the expedition departed from Camp Dubois near present-day Hartford, Illinois, heading up the Missouri River into territory no American expedition had ever documented. From the beginning, York's physical strength proved indispensable. While others struggled with the brutal labor of pushing boats against the current, York's powerful frame never seemed to tire. He hunted game that fed the company when supplies ran low. He gathered wild foods and helped identify edible plants. But perhaps most remarkably, York possessed natural diplomatic abilities that would become crucial to the expedition's survival. When the Corps encountered Native American tribes along the route, the Oto, Missouri Sioux, and others, York became a figure of intense fascination. Many tribal members had never seen a black person before. Clark's journals record that York was treated with great curiosity and respect, that he performed dances and feats of strength that amazed onlookers, and that his presence often eased tensions and opened channels of communication. Was this York's choice, to perform and entertain? Or was he commanded to do so by Clark? The journals don't tell us York's inner thoughts, his feelings about being displayed like a curiosity, or whether he resented the role forced upon him. What we know is that time and again, York's interactions with indigenous peoples created goodwill that may have prevented violence, and certainly facilitated trade and information exchange that proved vital to the expedition's success. York was not the only overlooked member of the expedition whose contributions history nearly lost. Sacagawea, the young Shoshone woman who joined the Corps with her infant son and French-Canadian husband Toussaint Charbonneau, also played a crucial role that was minimized for generations. Yet there's a painful irony in their parallel erasures. While Sacagawea eventually received recognition, her image now appears on currency, statues commemorate her, and her name is widely known. York remains obscure. Both were essential. Both lacked agency in joining the expedition. Both served as cultural bridges. Both demonstrated remarkable courage and skill. The difference? Sacagawea's story could be romanticized in ways that didn't threaten national mythology, while York's story forced Americans to confront the contradiction at the heart of the core of discovery. How could an expedition celebrating freedom and exploration depend on a man who possessed neither? Contemporary accounts suggest York and Sacagawea worked together on occasion. Two people whose knowledge and abilities exceeded their official status. Two individuals contributing to a mission that would celebrate everyone except them. Imagine the conversations they might have had, the unspoken understanding between two people vital to the expedition's success, yet denied full humanity by those around them. Their parallel stories ask us, whose contributions do we remember? Whose do we conveniently forget? In November 1805, after 18 brutal months of travel, the expedition reached the Pacific Ocean near present-day Astoria, Oregon. They needed to decide where to build their winter fort. And here, something extraordinary happened. Something that reveals both progress and its limits, hope and heartbreak. The expedition held a vote. Not just the officers, not just the soldiers, but everyone, including York and Sacagawea. Clark's journal entry from November 24, 1805, records the votes of each person. And there, listed among the others, is York and Janie, Clark's name for Sacagawea. Think about what this meant. In 1805, 60 years before the abolition of slavery, 95 years before women gained the right to vote in Wyoming, the first state to do so, an enslaved black man and a Native American woman cast votes that carried equal weight with those of free white men. It was a moment of democracy unprecedented in American history. Yet the tragedy lies in what happened next. This moment of equality was temporary, situational, and would be taken back the moment the expedition ended. York returned to slavery. His vote at Fort Clatsop would be the only vote he would ever cast. The expedition created a bubble where York's contributions demanded recognition, where survival required acknowledging his equal humanity. But that bubble would burst as soon as they returned to civilization. This single vote stands as both the highest point of York's recognition and a bitter reminder of how fleeting and conditional that recognition would be. The return journey was even more dangerous than the westward trek. The Corps split into smaller groups to explore different routes, facing hostile encounters, near starvation, and brutal conditions. Throughout it all, York continued to prove indispensable. He helped navigate treacherous terrain, hunted when game was scarce, and used his size and strength to protect the company. During one particularly dangerous encounter with potentially hostile Chinook warriors, York's imposing presence and calm demeanor helped defuse a situation that could have turned violent. When members of the expedition fell ill, York helped care for them. When morale flagged, his spirit helped sustain the group. Yet in Lewis and Clark's official reports, and the public accounts that shaped how Americans understood the expedition, York appears only briefly, mentioned in passing as Clark's servant, his specific contributions obscured or attributed to others. When the expedition returned to St. Louis in September 1806, to celebrations and acclaim, when Lewis and Clark became national heroes, when expedition members received double pay and land grants totaling hundreds of acres, York received nothing. Not freedom, not land, not payment, not even public acknowledgement of his service. He had risked his life for over 2 years, traveled 8,000 miles through unknown territory, contributed skills and knowledge that helped ensure the expedition's success, and he returned to the same bondage he'd left. Imagine that homecoming. While your companions celebrate, while the nation rejoices, you return to servitude, your heroism unrecognized, your contributions erased, your future unchanged. What happened next reveals the depths of slavery's cruelty and the moral blindness it produced even in those who had witnessed extraordinary humanity. After the expedition, York asked William Clark for his freedom. It was a reasonable request. He had served faithfully through unimaginable hardship, demonstrated intelligence and capability, proven himself equal to any man on the expedition. He wanted to remain near his wife, who was enslaved to someone else in the Louisville area. Clark refused. Not only refused, but became angry at the request. Letters between Clark and his brother Edmund reveal Clark's resentment that York would dare ask for freedom, that he seemed insolent and ungrateful for requesting what he had more than earned. Clark considered hiring York out to a severe master to break his spirit. Think about this. The man who had voted alongside York at Fort Clatsop, who had depended on York's strength and skills, who had witnessed York's courage and humanity for over 2 years, could still view him as property whose spirit needed breaking for wanting freedom. This is the poison of slavery. It could corrupt even those who had seen evidence of shared humanity, who had lived alongside enslaved people in conditions that demonstrated their full equality. York's request for freedom wasn't just denied, it was treated as insubordination, as if the expedition had taught Clark nothing about York's worth as a human being. What happened to York after this refusal remains frustratingly unclear, lost in the fog of history's selective memory. Some accounts suggest Clark eventually freed York, possibly around 1811, though no documentation confirms this. According to one version, told years later by Clark himself, York obtained his freedom, started a freight business with wagons and horses, but the business failed, and he died of cholera somewhere in Tennessee trying to return to Clark. But can we trust this account? It came from Clark, who had every reason to paint himself in the best light, to claim he'd eventually done the right thing. Other sources suggest different possibilities, that York may have remained enslaved until Clark's death, that he may have escaped, that he may have died before obtaining freedom. The confusion itself is telling. While we know intimate details of Lewis and Clark's later lives, while we can trace the fates of other expedition members, York vanishes into obscurity. Even Washington Irving, writing in 1836, mentioned meeting an old indigenous man who claimed to have seen York, living among a western tribe, having chosen to remain in the frontier rather than return to slavery. We don't know if this story is true. We don't know York's actual fate. We don't even know exactly when or where he died. The man who helped map the American West disappeared from the map of American memory. This erasure was not accidental. It was systematic, the result of a nation unwilling to acknowledge that an enslaved man had been essential to one of its founding myths. For nearly 2 centuries, York remained a footnote when he was mentioned at all. But in recent decades, historians have worked to restore York to his rightful place in the expedition's story. Robert Betts's 1985 book In Search of York helped bring attention to this forgotten hero. Scholars combing through expedition journals found numerous references to York that previous historians had overlooked or dismissed. Indigenous oral histories, when finally consulted, remembered York more vividly than many white expedition members. Slowly, York's story emerged from the shadows. In 2001, a statue of York was erected in Louisville, Kentucky. In 2006, on the bicentennial of the expedition's return, York received posthumous recognition in various commemorations. Schools began teaching about York alongside Lewis, Clark, and Sacagawea. But this recognition comes with complicated feelings. How many other crucial contributors have been erased from American history? What does it say about a nation that it could celebrate an expedition for generations while forgetting a man without whom it might have failed? York's rediscovery forces us to ask, how many other Yorks are there, written out of histories they helped create, their contributions stolen by a narrative that couldn't acknowledge their humanity? The restoration of York's story is vital, but it's also an indictment, evidence of how thoroughly America has crafted its myths to exclude those whose presence complicates the narrative of freedom and exploration. York's story is not a comfortable one. It offers no easy redemption, no satisfying resolution. He was essential to the core of discovery, yet he returned to enslavement. He demonstrated courage, intelligence, and humanity, yet he was denied the basic recognition afforded to others. He helped expand the American nation, yet America excluded him from its founding story. But York's story must be told precisely because it is uncomfortable, because it reveals the contradictions at the heart of American history. The Lewis and Clark expedition is celebrated as a triumph of exploration and American expansion, and in many ways it was, but it was also built on the labor of an enslaved man and dependent on the knowledge of indigenous peoples, both groups who would suffer immensely from the westward expansion the expedition enabled. York's presence on that journey wasn't symbolic, it was essential. His strength, his intelligence, his diplomatic skills, his courage, these weren't minor contributions, they were central to the expedition's success. When we erase York from the story, we don't just dishonor his memory, we distort history itself. We create a false narrative of who built America, and how it was built. York's life asks us to reckon with uncomfortable questions. Can we celebrate American achievements while acknowledging they were built on the backs of enslaved people? Can we honor complex histories that include both heroism and injustice? Can we remember those whose contributions were deliberately erased? As you drift to sleep tonight, carry York with you. His strength, his resilience, his contributions, and yes, his suffering. Remember that history is not just what happened, but what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. For 200 years, America chose to forget York. Now, finally, we're beginning to remember. His story reminds us that behind every great American achievement are people whose names we don't know, whose contributions we didn't acknowledge, whose humanity we failed to recognize. York helped map the American West, but his own story remained unmapped for generations. Now that we've found him again, we have a responsibility to ensure his story is told, his contributions acknowledged, and his humanity honored. He was not a footnote. He was not property. He was not a servant. He was York, explorer, diplomat, hunter, protector, and hero. A man who helped shape America and deserves his place in its memory. Rest now knowing that the work of remembering continues, that stories once buried are being unearthed, and that the full truth of American history, complicated, painful, and essential, is finally beginning to be told. York's journey covered 8,000 miles across uncharted territory, but his journey into American memory has taken 200 years. Both deserve to be remembered. Good night, and may we never forget those who were forgotten, never erase those who were erased, never diminish those whose contributions built the very ground beneath our feet.